Billy Ray, a 48-year-old trucker with a sun-bleached shock of blonde hair and deep lines around his eyes, stared at the road in front of his aging Kenworth. 3 weeks of driving from Nebraska to Texas and back had left their mark on him. His shoulders hunched as if under an invisible weight, his back ached from the long hours behind the wheel. His face, weathered and with a short stubble that he idly scratched with his fingers, seemed carved from rough stone, not exactly handsome, but honest. His eyes, a gray-blue like the overcast sky over the plains, were tired, but there was still a spark in them, the same spark that made him come home every time. To Kara. He turned on the radio, and the old radio croaked out Johnny Cash's voice. "I walk the line." Billy chuckled, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. Kara loved that song. She always sang it as she stood at the stove, frying eggs or brewing coffee. He imagined walking into their small house on the outskirts of Hayesville, Kansas, kicking off his dusty boots, wrapping his arms around her, nuzzling her soft brown hair that smelled of vanilla shampoo. She would smile that smile of hers, a little mischievous, a little tired, and say, "Here we go again, Ray. I thought you were going to stay in Texas with some waitress." And he would say, "No waitress can cook a steak like you do." And they would laugh, just like old times. 3 weeks without the house, without her voice, without the smell of their small kitchen where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee always lingered. It was a long time. Too long. Billy dreamed of silence, of sitting in his old chair in the living room, taking a cold beer from the fridge, and just being. Without the hum of the engine, without the endless roads, without the smell of diesel soaking into his clothes. He dreamed of the steak Kara would cook, juicy and crisp, and of her warm hands wrapped around his neck when he finally held her. The road wound through cornfields that were golden in the setting sun. Hayesville was close now, a small town where everyone knew everyone else, where life flowed slowly, like a river in a drought. Billy slowed down when he saw a familiar sign ahead. Hayesville, population 3,200. His house was on Poplar Street, a two-story house with peeling blue paint and a creaky porch. He could already picture himself parking the truck in the driveway, Kara running out to greet him, as she always did when she was in the kitchen, holding a towel. But something pricked his chest. A vague, hazy feeling, as if a shadow had fallen across the sunny day. He brushed it off, chalking it up to fatigue. 21 days on the road was no joke. He just wanted to go home. The sun was almost down when Billy turned onto Poplar, painting the sky crimson and orange. His truck rumbled to a stop in front of the house. He turned off the engine, and there was silence, so deep his ears began to ring. Billy stretched, his knuckles cracking, and climbed out of the cab. His boots crunched on the gravel as he walked to the front door, his bag slung over his shoulder. The lights were on in the house, warm and yellow, pouring in from the living room and the upstairs bedroom. Punishment was home. That was good. He pushed the door, which, as always, was slightly stuck, and went in. The hallway smelled of something sweet. Maybe Kara was baking a pie. But the smell was faint, almost drowned out by another, alien scent. Men's cologne. Billy frowned, but quickly dismissed the thought. He must have imagined it. He kicked off his shoes without untying the laces and dropped his bag by the stairs. "Kara," he called, his voice hoarse from the long silence of the journey. There was no answer, only a soft rustling from upstairs in the bedroom. Billy froze, listening. His heart suddenly began to beat faster, as if it sensed trouble. He walked slowly up the creaking stairs, each step echoing in his ears like hammer blows. The bedroom door was ajar, and voices came from within, muffled but distinct. "Didn't think he'd be back so early," a man's voice, low, with a slight hoarseness. Billy recognized it immediately. Dean Hatcher, the county sheriff. The neighbor is 3 doors down. The same Dean who always greeted Billy by patting him on the shoulder and brought Kara apples from his garden. "I told you, he never calls before he comes," Kara's voice, shaking, not from fear, but from something else. Despair, guilt. Billy felt the blood rush to his temples and a lump form in his throat. He pushed the door. The scene before him was like something pulled from a bad dream. Kara, his Kara, was standing by the bed, wearing only his old t-shirt that barely covered her hips. Her hair, usually neatly pulled back into a bun, was disheveled and her cheeks were flushed. Beside her, by the dresser, stood Dean Hatcher, tall, broad-shouldered, with gray in his dark hair and a square jaw that he was currently clenching tensely. His shirt was unbuttoned, his belt was loose, and his shoes were lying by the bed. Their beds. Billy, Kara gasped, clutching her hands to her chest as if she could hide behind them. You shouldn't have. Shouldn't have? Billy heard his own voice, strange, muffled, as if coming from far away. He looked at her wide-open brown eyes, in which fear and shame splashed, and he couldn't believe it. This was his Kara, the woman he had lived with for 18 years, who made him coffee in the morning, who laughed at his stupid jokes, who promised to wait for him no matter how long he traveled on the roads. Dean stepped forward, raising his hands in surrender. Billy, look, it's not what you think. Not that. Billy looked at him. His fists were clenched so hard his knuckles were white. He felt a fire building in his chest, not rage, but something heavier, more painful. Betrayal. You're in my bedroom, Dean. In my bed. With my wife. What the hell is that supposed to be? Kara stepped toward him, holding out her hand, but Billy stepped back, as if her touch might burn him. Billy, please, her voice shook, her eyes filling with tears. I didn't mean to, it's just, you've been away for so long, and I. 3 weeks, Kara, his voice cracked. 3 fucking weeks. I worked so we could have this house, this life. And you're like this? Dean buckled his belt, trying not to look Billy in the eye. It's my fault, Ray. Don't blame her. I went too far. Billy looked at him, and only one thought was running through his head. He could hit Dean now. He could knock him to the floor with one blow. He imagined his fist smashing into that smug jaw, the bones crunching. But he didn't move. Something inside him, maybe fatigue, maybe pain, held him like chains. Get out, he said quietly, looking at Dean. Dean nodded, grabbed his shoes, and walked quickly past without looking up. The front door slammed downstairs. Billy stood there, looking at Kara. Billy, she sobbed, stepping toward him. I don't know how it happened. I was lonely. You're always on the road, and I. Enough, he raised his hand, stopping her. His voice was cold, but inside he felt something important crumbling, something that had held him together all these years. I don't want to hear it. He turned and walked down the stairs. Kara called after him, but he didn't stop. He grabbed his bag and walked outside into the cool evening air. The truck was still where he'd left it. Billy climbed in, started the engine, and pulled out onto the road without looking back. The night was dark and moonless. The truck's headlights picked out chunks of asphalt, and Billy's mind was a whirlwind of fragments of thoughts. He didn't know where he was going. He was just going. His chest ached, as if someone had ripped out a piece of his heart and left a gaping hole. He thought about Kara, the way she had looked when he first saw her, in a diner by the highway, holding a tray and a smile that had taken his breath away. About how they had danced in the rain at their wedding because they couldn't afford a hall. About how she had cried when he left on his first long-haul trip and promised to wait. And now all he could see was her disheveled hair, her guilty eyes, the strange cologne in their bedroom. And Dean, fucking Dean Hatcher, who had always seemed so right, so one of the guys. Billy gripped the steering wheel so tightly his fingers ached. He wanted to scream, to punch the dashboard, but instead he just drove until the lights of Hayesville disappeared over the horizon. He stopped at an all-night gas station 40 miles out of town. He got out, bought a pack of cigarettes, even though he hadn't smoked in 10 years, and lit up, leaning against the truck. The smoke stung his throat, but it was better than the emptiness growing inside him. He looked up at the stars, bright and cold, and wondered, what now? Where to go? Home was Kara, and without her, he was just a trucker with no place on the map. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Billy pulled it out and looked at the screen. Kara, 5 missed calls and a message. Please come back. We need to talk. He squeezed the phone so hard the plastic cracked, but he didn't answer. Instead, he stubbed his cigarette out on the sole of his boot, got into the cab, and drove off. He didn't know where, but he wasn't going back to Hayesville. Not now. Black Dog, an old beat-up Kenworth with peeling black paint and an engine that growled like an animal at the edge of its seat, carried Billy Ray down Highway 54, its headlights cutting through the night with yellow beams. The asphalt stretched out before him like an endless ribbon, broken only occasionally by rusty signs that flashed the names of towns Billy had never heard of. He didn't know where he was going. For the first time in 20 years behind the wheel, he had no cargo, no route, no destination. Just a road as black as his thoughts, and a scene that played over and over in his head like a broken movie. Kara in his old t-shirt, disheveled, guilty-eyed. Dean Hatcher, the square-jawed sheriff, buckling his belt in their bedroom. Their bedroom. Billy gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His face, weathered and deeply lined by sun and fatigue, seemed like a frozen mask. His eyes, blue-gray as the sky before a storm, looked at the road, but they saw only that scene. He tried to drive it away by turning on the radio. The old radio wheezed something about love and broken hearts, and Billy turned it off in frustration. The songs that had once reminded him of Kara, of her smile, of her warm hands, now sounded like mockery. He was left alone with the roar of the engine and his own thoughts, which spun like a wheel in the mud, neither forward nor backward. He was 48, but that night he felt older, as if every year on the road had weighed heavily on his shoulders. His blonde hair, bleached at the temples, stuck out from under a tattered baseball cap, and the stubble he hadn't shaved in a week pricked his fingers as he rubbed his chin. He had always considered himself as tough as oak, not one to break under the blows of fate. But now, in the cockpit of the Black Dog, he felt something inside him crack. It wasn't rage, it wasn't anger. It was pain, deep and sticky as tar, filling his chest, making it hard to breathe. He thought about Kara, about the way she had looked 18 years ago, when he had first seen her in a diner by the highway, her chestnut hair pulled back into a high ponytail, her smile that took his breath away, her eyes as warm as the coffee she poured for him. He had been a young driver just starting out on the road, and she had been a waitress dreaming of something more. They had talked all night until the diner closed, and Billy had laughingly promised to come back. He had. In a week, in a month, in a year. And then they had married, in the rain, without a big party, but with a love he thought would last a lifetime. Now he didn't know what was left of that love. Only pain and the feeling that he had been betrayed not just by Kara, but by the entire world he had built for the two of them. He remembered how she had promised to wait for him, how she had written short notes and put them in his bag before flights. "Come back soon, Ray." How she had laughed at his stupid jokes, how she had cooked his steak always crispy, just the way he liked it. And now all he saw was her disheveled hair, her guilty look, the smell of someone else's cologne in their bedroom. And fucking Dean Hatcher, with his smug smile and the sheriff's badge that Billy had always thought was too shiny. He won't forgive. He won't forget. Not now, maybe never. An hour later, the road brought him to a gas station, a lonely island of light in the dark Kansas fields. The neon sign open 24/7 blinked, casting a reddish glow on the asphalt. A couple more trucks were parked nearby, their drivers probably asleep in the cabs or drinking coffee inside. Billy turned off the engine and climbed out of the Black Dog, feeling the cold night air sting his face. It smelled of gasoline, wet grass, and something distant, almost elusive of freedom he had never sought, but which now covered him like a heavy blanket. It was warm inside the gas station, almost stuffy. It smelled of burnt coffee and hot dogs and something sweet, maybe donuts, sitting under a glass case. Behind the counter stood a guy in his mid-20s, skinny, with long hair pulled back into a sloppy ponytail. His name tag said Cody. He was leafing through a car magazine, but he looked up as Billy walked in and gave him a look that was either curious or sympathetic. "Hey, buddy," Cody nodded, putting the magazine down. "Coffee? Or maybe something stronger. We got beer in the fridge, a couple bottles of whiskey behind the counter. It's a long night, you know." Billy shook his head. His voice was hoarse, as if it hadn't been used in hours. Coffee. Black. No sugar. Cody shrugged, pouring coffee into a plastic cup. Whatever you say, you look like the world just ended. Long flight, huh? Billy didn't answer, but the boy's words touched something inside. The world collapsed. Perhaps it did. He picked up a glass, threw a couple of crumpled dollars on the counter, and walked to a table by the window, away from the cash register. Cody, however, didn't let up. Seriously, man, are you okay? He leaned across the counter, looking at Billy with a strange mix of curiosity and concern. We get a lot of truckers hanging out here, telling stories. I could call Tom, he's around the corner fixing his Mac. He tells some crazy stories about a bear that got in his cab once, or that stripper in Nevada who stole his wallet. Billy looked up, and there was something in his gaze that made Cody shut up. I don't want any stories, he said quietly, but with such force that the boy flinched. Just let me sit. Cody raised his hands in surrender. Okay, no questions. Sit wherever you want. I'm here if anything happens. Billy sank into a chair by the window, looking at his reflection in the dark glass. His face was tired, his eyes red, the stubble he hadn't shaved in too long. He took a sip of coffee, but it was bitter, almost disgusting, like his thoughts. The scene in the bedroom came back to him. Kara, her trembling voice, Dean buckling his belt. He squeezed the glass so hard the plastic cracked and forced himself to take another sip. No, he wouldn't forget. He wouldn't forgive. He wasn't the type to forgive. The door clinked, and another man entered the station. He was about 50, stocky, wearing a worn leather jacket and a baseball cap with a Peterbilt logo. His beard, thick and gray, made him look like an old biker, and his arms, covered in faded tattoos, showed years of hard work. This must be Tom. He glanced around the room, spotted Billy, and without asking permission, plopped down in the chair opposite, placing a bottle of Coke in front of him. You're new to this lot, he said, taking a swig from the bottle. His voice was low and raspy, like a man who'd smoked too much and yelled too much on the road. I know everybody here. Tom Greer has been driving freight from Kansas to Oklahoma for 30 years. Who are you? Billy didn't want to talk. He wanted to be left alone, wanted the bearded man with his coke and tattoos to go away. But the silence in his head was unbearable, and he answered, just to fill the void. Billy Ray, trucker, Hayesville. Hayesville? Tom whistled, leaning back in his chair. Small town. I bet everyone knows everyone there. Your wife is probably waiting with pies, right? Or borscht, if she's the kind of person who likes to cook something more complicated. Billy tensed, and Tom must have noticed, because his smile faded slightly. Oh man, did I say something wrong? He took a sip of his Coke, squinting at Billy. Trouble at home? Wife? Or maybe kids, although you don't look like a family man. Billy was silent, but his fingers around the glass gave him away. Tom nodded, as if he understood without words. You know, I went through that too. About 10 years ago. I come home and my Linda's with some insurance agent. Right in our kitchen, can you believe it? I almost blew the place apart. I thought I'd kill him, or her, or both of them. Billy looked up, interested for the first time in the entire conversation. What did you do? Tom shrugged, but there was a flash of old pain in his eyes that he never seemed to be able to hide completely. At first I wanted to kill him. Then I wanted to leave and never come back. Just get in the truck and drive until the road ends. But you know what I did? I went back. I talked to her. Found out why. I wouldn't say I forgave her, but I understood. Sometimes people do shit because they feel shitty, because they're lonely, because life isn't always like the love songs. What about you? What are you going to do? Billy stared into his coffee as if the answer was there. He thought of Kara, of her notes, of her laughter, of the way she'd hugged him when he'd come back from flights, and then of her guilty look, of her trembling voice, of Dean standing in their bedroom. I don't know, he said finally, and his voice was quiet, almost broken. Just going. Somewhere. Tom chuckled, tapping his fingers on the bottle. An empty road, huh? I've been down that road. It's a long road, man, and it doesn't lead anywhere. You can go to Mexico or Canada, but you'll never get away from yourself. He finished his Coke and stood up, clapping Billy on the shoulder. If you decide to stop, Cody has my number on his business card. Call me, we'll talk. Because loneliness is worse than any betrayal. Billy nodded but didn't say anything. Tom left, leaving him alone with his coffee and his thoughts. He pulled out his phone, 3 new messages from Kara. Billy, please answer. I didn't mean for this to happen. I love you. He read them, and his chest hurt again. Loved him. After he'd caught her with Dean. After she'd ruined everything they had. He squeezed the phone so hard the plastic cracked, but he didn't answer. Instead, he turned it off and shoved it in his pocket. Cody, standing behind the counter, watched him but said nothing. Billy finished his coffee, left a few coins on the table, and went out to the Black Dog. The night was cold, and the stars sparkled like shards of glass against the black velvet of the sky. He climbed into the cab, started the engine, and pulled out onto the highway. The road stretched ahead, empty and endless like his thoughts. He didn't know where he was going. But he knew one thing. He wasn't turning back. Not now. Maybe never. Billy drove for several more hours, until the sky in the east began to lighten, turning a pale pink. Fatigue settled on him like a heavy weight, but he didn't want to stop. Stopping would mean time to think, and thinking hurts. He turned on the radio again, this time picking up a local station where the announcer was talking in a raspy voice about the price of corn. Billy listened, not paying attention, just to drown out the silence. At the next fork in the road, he saw another gas station, but he drove past it. He didn't need coffee. He didn't need food. He needed the road, the only thing that wasn't betraying him now. He remembered Tom's words, "You can't run away from yourself." Maybe so, but he would try. He would drive until he found a place where the pain would be quieter, where he could breathe without feeling his heart breaking into pieces. By morning, he was deep in Kansas, in a place where the fields stretched to the horizon and houses came and went every 10 miles. He pulled over to the side of the road just to stretch his legs. It was quiet, except for the wind rustling the tall grass. Billy got out of the cab, lit a cigarette, his second that night, even though he hadn't smoked in 10 years, and watched the smoke dissipate in the morning air. He thought about Kara. What was she doing now? Crying, calling him, sitting with Dean, maybe, discussing how to fix this. The thought was like a knife in his chest. He stubbed his cigarette out on the sole of his boot and walked back into the cab. The phone was on the passenger seat, the screen dark. Billy picked it up, turned it over in his hands, but didn't turn it on. Instead, he dropped it in the glove compartment and slammed the lid shut. Let it stay there. Let the world stay there. Black Dog purred, and Billy was back on the road. The sun was rising over the fields, painting them golden, but it made no difference to Billy. The road was as empty as his heart, and he rode on, not looking back. The road stretched like an endless gray ribbon, and Billy Ray felt the fatigue settle on him like a weight of bricks as he gripped the steering wheel of Black Dog. He had been awake for more than 24 hours, but sleep seemed a luxury he had no right to. Every time he closed his eyes, the same image came to him. Kara, her hair disheveled, her guilty eyes, and Dean Hatcher buckling his belt in their bedroom. The scene burned inside him like acid, but now there was something new mixed in with the pain, a cold, calculating determination. He wouldn't just run. He wouldn't just suffer. He wanted to know everything. Billy pulled into another gas station as the sun was high in the sky, bathing the Kansas fields in gold. It wasn't the dump where he'd met Tom the night before, but a bigger one with a diner and a car wash. He parked the truck at the edge of the lot, out of sight, and pulled his phone out of the glove compartment. The screen lit up, showing 7 missed calls from Kara and another message. "Billy, please, we need to talk." "I'll explain." He gritted his teeth, feeling the fire in his chest flare up again. Explain? What was there to explain? But instead of answering, he opened his contacts and scrolled to the number he'd dialed a week after their wedding. He'd been a young driver full of hope, and she'd been a waitress dreaming of a better life. Now, 18 years later, he looked at his phone and saw not the Kara he'd loved, but the woman who'd ruined their lives. He couldn't forgive. He couldn't forget, but he could understand why it happened. And to do that, he had to dig deeper. Billy sat in the cab of the Black Dog, sipping his now cold coffee from a paper cup, dialing a number he hadn't opened in 3 years. Joel Pierce, an old friend from Oklahoma, and a guy who had once helped him set up the GPS in his truck. Joel was the kind of guy who could hack into anything from a bank account to a coffee maker if he wanted to. Billy didn't like asking for help, but he had no choice. If he wanted to know the truth, he needed someone who could see behind the curtain. "Billy Ray, are you alive, damn it?" Joel's voice on the phone was loud, with a slight rasp to it, as if he'd just put out a cigarette. "Thought you'd be driving some Cineritas around Mexico by now." "This is no laughing matter, Joe," Billy said quietly but firmly, looking out the windshield at the road. "I need your help. Seriously." Joel paused for a second, catching the tone. "What happened? Are you in trouble?" "Not me. Kara," Billy paused, choosing his words. "She's with someone else. I want to know what's going on. Can you look at her phone, her email, everything?" There was silence on the other end. Joel whistled. "Seriously, Kara? I thought you were like Romeo and Juliet, only with a truck and stakes. Okay, give me a few days. Is her phone number still the same?" "Yeah," Billy said, his throat tightening. "And look at Dean Hatcher, sheriff of Hayesville. Anything you can find. Debts, connections, habits, everything." "Sheriff?" Joel chuckled. "Are you in some kind of Western, Ray? Okay, I'll take care of it. But it's not free, you know. You can't get away with beer." "Name your price." Billy didn't want to haggle. This wasn't about money. This was about the truth. "Relax, man. I was just kidding." Joel laughed, but then grew serious. "Give me some time. I'll call you when I have something worthwhile." Billy hung up the phone and leaned back in his seat, looking out at the dusty horizon. He didn't know what he was expecting from Joel. Proof? Clues? Or just a reason to understand how his life had gone downhill. 3 days later, Joel called back. Billy was staying at a motel on the outskirts of Wichita, a cheap one with a sagging mattress and a musty smell. He hadn't slept well in a week, surviving on coffee and cigarettes, which had re-entered his life like old friends. The phone rang as he was shaving in front of a cracked bathroom mirror. "Got you something," Joel said quickly, as if he were on edge himself. "Kara, yeah, there's correspondence. With Dean. Half a year, maybe more. Started with something banal. He stopped by to fix your faucet. She bought him coffee. Then messages, calls, photos. Nothing special, but intimate, let's say. Meetings at your place when you weren't there. Dates coincide with your flights." Billy stood there, clutching the razor until a drop of blood ran down his chin. He hadn't noticed he'd cut himself. "Photo?" he asked, his voice muffled. "Yes, a few. They're at the lake in his car. Nothing explicit, but you know what I mean." Joel hesitated. "Do you want me to send them?" "Take it off." Billy didn't know why he wanted to do that, but he had to see. A minute later, a notification came through on his phone. He opened the files, and each photo was a punch to the gut. Kara, laughing in a flowing dress, sitting on the hood of a sheriff's car. Dean, with his smug smile, had his arm around her waist. The lake, the sunset, their shadows merging. Billy stared at these photos until the screen went black. He didn't cry. He felt nothing at all, just emptiness, cold and thick as oil. "What about Dean?" he asked when Joel spoke again. "Dean Hatcher, county sheriff. 45, widower, no kids. 20 years on the job, clean as a whistle. But dig deeper, and there are cracks. He owes a mortgage, at least 100,000. Payments are overdue. The bank is breathing down his neck. Plus, he likes cards. Not casinos, but underground games in Wichita. Loses more often than he wins. There are rumors that he took money from local dealers, but there is no evidence." Billy was silent, processing. Dean, the model sheriff, deeply in debt. It was unexpected, but not surprising. People like him always seemed too perfect to be true to Billy. One more thing, Joel lowered his voice. Kara got a credit card in your name. A month ago. Limit, 10 grand. Clean so far, but she's the one spending it, not you. And the insurance policy is new in your name. Life insurance, a decent amount. Coincidence? Billy froze. Credit card? Insurance? He knew Kara, she never liked paperwork, always left the bills to him. Why was she doing this, and why now? He felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Coincidence? He repeated, his voice cold as steel. I don't believe in coincidences. Me too, Joel coughed. Want me to do some more digging? I can check her bank accounts, her phone records for the last year. Maybe something else will pop up. Dig, Billy said. Whatever you can find. And Dean too. If he's dirty, I want to know. Got it, Joel paused. Billy, are you sure you're okay? This is heavy shit. I'm fine, Billy lied. Just do what I ask. He hung up and sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the threadbare carpet. Credit card. Insurance. Dean's debts. This wasn't just cheating. This was something more, something that smelled like calculation. He opened the laptop he'd brought from home and started searching for himself. Dean Hatcher wasn't just a sheriff. He was a local celebrity, a headline grabber. But Billy knew that behind such facades there was often dirt. He found articles about Dean, lifetime achievement awards, photos from charity events, a smile that made you want to punch someone. Nothing suspicious. But Joel was right. There were always cracks. Billy pulled up the county courthouse website and started digging through public records. Dean had been cited for a couple of cases, minor violations, nothing serious. But one case caught his eye, a lawsuit from a local bank for a mortgage default. The amount was $120,000, 3 months overdue. Billy jotted it down in a notebook that he kept nearby. He also found a mention of underground poker games in Wichita, nothing concrete, just rumors on trucker forums. But rumors don't just happen. He turned to Kara. Her social media profile was mostly empty, a few photos from a neighborhood party, a few posts about gardening. But Billy noticed that she'd recently added Dean as a friend. The chats Joel had sent her started innocently. Thanks for helping with the faucet. You're welcome, always a pleasure. Then, want to grab coffee sometime. And, do you know where to find me? Billy read until the words began to blur. He didn't want to believe that Kara was planning anything more than cheating. But a credit card? Insurance? That didn't sound like her. Or did he just not know her as well as he thought? By evening, Billy was sitting in a diner across the street from the motel, drinking beer and flipping through his notes. He had begun to compile a dossier, unofficial but detailed. Dean Hatcher, sheriff, debts, gambling, punishment, credit card, insurance, correspondence. He had even found the address of a poker room in Wichita where Dean was rumored to have gambled. Maybe he should pay it a visit, see who was hanging out there, who Dean was hanging out with. Billy was no detective, but he was stubborn, and stubbornness was half the battle in his business. He called Joel again. Get me the address of this club, and see if Dean's connected to any shady characters. If he's in debt, someone has to be covering for him. I'm already working on it, Joel replied. But Billy, be careful. If Dean's in deep shit, he won't be happy about you digging. He shouldn't be happy. Billy took a sip of beer. I've got nothing to lose. He hung up and watched the sun set outside his window. It was a slow, crimson sunset. Billy felt something new growing inside him, not just pain, but purpose. He wouldn't go back to Hayesville until he knew the truth. The whole truth. About Kara, about Dean, about what they were up to. And if it was more than betrayal, he'd be ready. Black Dog was waiting in the parking lot, and the road was ahead. And he'd keep driving until he found the answers. Billy Ray sat in the cab of his Black Dog, parked in a deserted motel lot in Wichita, staring at the screen of the old laptop he'd grabbed from home. The light from the monitor caught his eyes, which were as blue-gray as an overcast sky, but they held none of the weariness that had plagued him for the last few days. Instead, there was a cold, almost frightening determination. He didn't just want the truth. He was going to wrest it from the hands of those who tried to hide it behind false smiles and empty promises. Kara, Dean. They thought they could lead him on, but Billy Ray wasn't one to give in without a fight. The last call from Joel, his oldest buddy, had changed everything. A credit card in his name, taken out by Kara. An insurance policy on his life for a sum that would make anyone's head spin. Text messages with Dean that started with innocent, "Thanks for the coffee," and ended with meetings behind his back. And rumors about the sheriff's debts, about his underground poker games. It all fit together, but Billy didn't see the whole picture yet. All he knew was that to figure out what Kara and Dean were up to, he'd have to be smarter, more cunning, and closer to them than they could ever expect. The idea for the cameras came out of nowhere during another sleepless morning in a motel while he was surfing the internet for information about Dean. On one of the trucker forums, someone had mentioned hidden cameras, cheap, button-sized ones with Wi-Fi and the ability to record to the cloud. Billy had never been paranoid, but the thought of watching his own house seemed like the only way to find out the truth. He didn't trust Kara. He didn't trust Dean. And hell, he didn't even trust himself anymore, his ability to see people for who they really were. Billy found the equipment he needed at a small electronics store in Wichita. The salesman, a young guy with a pierced eyebrow and a dragon tattoo on his neck, enthusiastically explained how the mini cameras worked. You just connect to Wi-Fi, download the app, and that's it, you can watch from anywhere in China. Billy nodded silently, paid cash, and left with 3 tiny devices, each about the size of a coin. He wasn't sure how far he'd go, but he knew there was no turning back. Returning to Hayesville was harder than he expected. As he turned onto the familiar Poplar Street, his heart pounded as if it wanted to burst out of his chest. The house looked the same as it always did. The blue paint was peeling, the porch creaked underfoot, and the warm yellow light glowed in the living room window. But now the house seemed foreign, like a set from an old movie where everyone was pretending to be happy. Billy parked the black dog in the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat for a few minutes, staring at the front door. He knew he had to go in. He knew he had to play a part. But every cell in his body screamed, "Run." Kara opened the door as soon as he knocked. Her face, usually so familiar, with its soft features and brown eyes, was now like a mask. She looked tired, with shadows under her eyes, her hair pulled back into a messy bun, and she clutched a tea towel in her hands, as if it would shield her from his gaze. "Billy," she breathed, relief and fear mixed in her voice. "You're back." He forced a smile, though it was hard. "Yeah, lots of flights," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "Thought I'd stop by, have a chat." Kara stepped back, letting him into the house. It smelled like it always did, coffee, vanilla flavoring, and something vaguely homey. But now the smell felt foreign to Billy, like the rest of the house. He dropped his bag by the stairs and walked into the living room, where Kara immediately began bustling about, offering coffee, food, anything. "Are you hungry? I can heat up a steak," she said quickly, nervously, not looking him in the eye. "Or maybe a sandwich. We have ham." "Don't," he interrupted, sitting down in his old chair. It creaked under his weight, and for a second he felt at home, but only for a second. "Just sit down, Kara. Let's talk." She froze, then slowly sank down onto the couch, clutching the towel in her hands. Her fingers were shaking, and Billy noticed it. He noticed everything, how she avoided his gaze, how her lips trembled, how she nervously tugged at the hem of her sweater. He had known her for 18 years, knew her every gesture, every habit, and now he saw guilt. But he did not show it. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, looking into her eyes. "About us, about what happened, and I don't want to ruin it. We've been through too much together." Kara blinked, tears welling in her eyes. "Billy, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for you to see. It was a mistake. Dean, he just—" "Don't talk about him," Billy said, holding up his hand to stop her. His voice was calm, but inside he was seething. "I don't want to know what happened to Dean. I want to know what's going to happen to us." She nodded, wiping her tears with her sleeve. "I want things to go back to the way they used to be. I love you, Billy. I really do." He looked at her, and every word she said was like a knife stabbing him in the chest. Loved him? Then why had he found those messages on her phone? Why had she put up a credit card in his name? Why the insurance? But he nodded, forcing himself to look resigned. "I want things to go back to the way they used to be, too. But I need time. And flights. A lot of them, Kara. I can't just sit at home." "I understand," she sniffed, trying to smile. "I'll wait, as long as it takes." Billy stood up, stretching as if exhaustion was getting the better of him. "I'll stay the night and leave in the morning. New order, taking a load to Nebraska. I'll be back in a week or two." Kara nodded, and he saw relief in her eyes. She thought he believed her. She thought everything was getting better, and that was exactly what he wanted. That night, after Kara fell asleep, Billy set up the cameras. He moved as quietly as a shadow, trying not to make the floorboards creak. The first camera went into the living room, hidden behind an old radio on a shelf. The second in the kitchen, in the corner where the cereal box sat. The third in the bedroom, behind a framed wedding photo. He hated himself for this, for turning their home into a trap, for spying on the woman he'd loved his entire life. But he hated Kara and Dean even more. The cameras were simple but effective, recording everything and sending the data to a cloud that Billy could access through an app on his phone. He tested the signal, made sure everything was working, and went to sleep on the living room couch, unable to bring himself to lie down next to Kara. She was asleep upstairs in their bed, and he could hear her breathing evenly through the half-open door. It broke his heart, but he reminded himself, she wasn't who she was. Maybe she never was. He left in the morning, leaving Kara with a quick, "I'll call you when I get there." She hugged him, and her arms were warm, but Billy felt only cold. He got into the Black Dog and hit the highway, but instead of heading out of Nebraska, he headed back to Wichita. There, in the motel, he opened his laptop and connected to the cameras. The first recording appeared 2 days later. Billy was sitting in a cafe, sipping a beer, when the app alerted him to movement in the house. He opened the feed and saw Kara in the living room. She was wearing her favorite blue sweater, holding a mug of tea and talking on the phone. Her voice was muffled, but Billy could make out. He believed, "Yes, I'm sure, it will be over soon." His heart sank. Over what would end? He wrote down the time and date, adding a note to his notebook. On the third day, another recording appeared. Dean Hatcher walked into the house as if it were his own, without knocking. Billy watched as he put his arm around Kara as she pulled away, but not too firmly. They sat in the kitchen, and the camera clearly recorded their conversation. Billy put on his headphones so as not to miss a word. "He doesn't suspect anything." Dean's voice was low, with a slight rasp, like a man who was used to giving orders. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Kara said quietly but firmly. "He thinks I'm remorseful. He said he wants to make things right." Dean chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Good. That's good for us. Insurance is in place, right?" Kara nodded, looking at the floor. "Yeah, it's all set. But Dean, I'm not sure. It's too late to doubt," he snapped. "We're deep in debt, Kara. You know the bank is already pressing. If we don't do this, we'll lose everything. The house, the car, everything." Billy felt his blood run cold. He clenched his fists, trying to breathe evenly. They were talking about money, debts, insurance, his insurance. "It shouldn't be hard," Dean continued, his voice quieter, almost conspiratorial. "A road accident. Trucks are dangerous. The brakes failed, or maybe he fell asleep at the wheel. No one's going to dig." Kara was silent, and Billy could see her hands shaking. "I don't want him to die," she finally said, almost in a whisper. I wanted us to have money, to start over." "Then don't think about it." Dean leaned toward her, his hand on her shoulder. "Think about us, about being free. without debt, without this town, without its endless flights. Billy turned off the feed. He couldn't watch anymore. His hands were shaking, and he resisted the urge to throw his laptop against the wall. An accident? They were planning to kill him. Not just deceive him, not just betray him, kill him. For money, for insurance, for their new life. He stood up, paced the room, trying to calm himself. His thoughts were jumbled, but one thing was clear. He wouldn't let them do this. He wouldn't be a victim. He pulled out his phone and dialed Joel. "Joe," his voice was hoarse, almost alien. "They want me out. Road rage. I heard them. Camera footage." There was silence on the other end, and then Joel cursed. "Damn, Billy, this is serious. Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Billy said, gripping the phone so tightly his fingers were white. "I need your help. Check everything with the insurance. And with Dean. If he's planning this, he might have already done something about it." "Got it," Joel said quickly, as if he'd sensed the danger himself. "I'll check. But Billy, you need to be careful. If they're up to this, they won't stop." "I know," Billy looked at the laptop screen, where a frame with Kara and Dean was frozen. "And I won't stop." He hung up and went back to the tapes. He watched them over and over until the words were seared into his memory. Every look from Kara, every word from Dean. He wrote everything down, dates, times, details. His file grew, and with each new fact, he felt the pain in his chest give way to cold, calculating rage. They wanted him dead. Fine, let them try. But he would be ready. Late in the evening, Billy sat in a cafe, watching the sunset. His notebook was covered with names, dates, amounts. He knew Dean was in debt, knew Kara had taken out life insurance. He knew they had met not once, not twice, but dozens of times behind his back. He knew their plan, or at least part of it. But he didn't know how far they were willing to go, and he didn't know how to stop them without losing himself. He ordered another beer and opened his camera app. The house was empty. Kara had gone, probably to the neighbors or the store. Dean hadn't shown up. Billy looked around the empty living room, at the familiar couch, at the old chair where he liked to sit with a beer after a flight. This was his home, his life, and they were going to take it away. He finished his beer and closed his laptop. Black Dog was waiting in the parking lot, and the road was ahead. He wouldn't go back to Hayesville until he was ready, until he knew everything, until he found a way to stop them. He didn't know how far he'd go, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't let them win. Not now, maybe never. Billy Ray sat in the cab of his Black Dog, parked on a deserted dirt road a few miles outside of Hayesville. The night was muggy, the air smelling of dust and dry grass. He held a notebook in his hand, covered in neat but hasty handwriting. Names, dates, amounts, details of conversations captured by cameras in his own home. Kara and Dean's notes, their cold calculations, their traffic accident talk, burned him like a hot iron. He didn't just want to stop them, he wanted them to pay. Pay for the betrayal, the lies, the daring to see him as nothing more than a liability to be taken out for insurance and a new life. Billy was not a vindictive man. 20 years behind the wheel had taught him patience. Patience for the long hours on the road, patience for the nagging dispatchers, patience for the endless checkpoints. But this was different. This was personal. Kara, the woman he trusted more than himself, and Dean Hatcher, the sheriff with the slick smile and dirty secrets, had crossed a line. They wanted him dead, and Billy decided he wasn't going to run or wait for their plan to work. He was going to fight, and Dean would be the first to make the move. Billy knew that Dean Hatcher was more than just a neighbor, more than just his wife's lover. He was the county sheriff, a figure respected and sometimes feared in Hayesville. His reputation was his shield, the awards for his service, the pictures in the local paper, the handshakes with the mayor. But Billy knew that beneath that facade were cracks, debts, gambling, shady connections. If he could crack that shield, Dean would be vulnerable, and vulnerable men make mistakes. Billy was about to make him make a mistake that couldn't be hidden behind a sheriff's badge. The idea came to him while he was scrolling through the local news on his laptop in a motel. Hayesville was a small town, but like any other, it had its own passions. Disputes over taxes, complaints about poor street cleaning, rumors of police corruption. Billy came across an article about protests in a neighboring county, where a police officer had unjustly detained a teenager and everything was caught on video. The scandal erupted instantly. Resignations, investigations, angry posts on social media. Billy realized that this was his chance. Dean was not one to tolerate his authority being questioned. If you set him up, provoked him into making a mistake and recorded it, his reputation would collapse. And with it, his power. Billy called it Plan Zero. Zero because it was only the first step. The beginning of the end for Dean Hatcher. Billy returned to Hayesville a week after setting up the cameras. He didn't call Cara to let her know he was coming. Instead, he rented a room at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, a mile from his house where no questions asked for cash. The Prairie Star was shabby, with faded wallpaper and a musty smell, but Billy didn't care. He wanted a staging area, a place where he could plan without attracting attention. He laid out his notebook, his laptop, and his new camera on the table, not like the ones he had set up at home, but a compact one with a good zoom and night vision. He'd bought it in Wichita, at the same store where he got the hidden cameras, and it was now his main tool. The plan was risky but simple. Dean Hatcher patrolled Hayesville at night, especially around an old park on the outskirts where teenagers often gathered to smoke and drink beer, away from their parents' eyes. Billy knew the place. He'd hung out there in his younger days before he was a trucker and just a kid with dreams of the road. The park was the perfect setting, crowded enough to provoke Dean, but secluded enough for the camera to capture everything. Billy contacted Joel, his it guy, who was now not just an assistant, but an accomplice. Joel, despite grumbling that this is like a Gotham spy movie, agreed to help. He found a local kid who could play the part, Leroy Jones, an 18-year-old black kid fresh out of high school. Leroy was the son of a mechanic at the auto shop where Billy fixed Black Dog. The kid was smart, but he had a reputation for being a rebel, the perfect candidate to rile Dean up. "Are you sure this will work?" Joel asked into the phone, his voice tight. "If Dean smells a setup, you're screwed." "He won't," Billy said, looking at the map of Hayesville, where he had marked the park with a red marker. "He's too smug. He thinks he can get away with it." "What if he loses his temper?" Joel coughed. "Leroy's not stupid, but he's a kid. If Dean decides, he can put pressure on him." "I'll be there," Billy snapped. "With a camera. I'll record everything. If Dean overdoes this, it'll be his undoing." Joel sighed. "Okay, I'll talk to Leroy. But Billy, if this goes to hell, I don't want my name getting out there." "It won't," Billy said firmly, although inside he was seething. "Just do what I ask." Leroy agreed the next day. Billy met him at the garage, away from prying eyes. The guy was tall and skinny, with short dreadlocks and a look that was a mixture of brazenness and caution. He sat on an old chair in the corner of the garage, chewing gum, and listened as Billy explained the plan. "So you want me to put on a show?" Leroy smirked, but his eyes were serious. "Like, hang out in the park, make a little noise, get the sheriff to bite?" "Right," Billy nodded, standing by his truck. "Nothing dangerous. Just be yourself. Chat with your friends, turn up the music. If Dean shows up, don't argue with him, but don't give in right away. Let him get his own way." Leroy narrowed his eyes. "What do I get out of this?" Billy pulled an envelope with $500 from his pocket. "That's an advance. Another 500 when this is over, and I'll make sure you're not touched." Leroy took the envelope, counted the money, and nodded. "Deal. But if this Hatcher starts waving his badge, I'm not going to keep quiet." "You don't have to," Billy said. "Just keep your cool. I'll write it all down." Friday night was perfect for the plan. The park on the outskirts of Hayesville was full of teenagers, some sitting on benches, some skateboarding, some just hanging out, listening to music from a portable speaker. Billy parked the Black Dog a half-mile from the park, on the side of the road where he wouldn't be seen. He grabbed his camera and a backpack filled with water and sandwiches and set up in the bushes at the edge of the park, where he had a good view. The camera was set up, the battery was charged, and the tripod was safely hidden in the tall grass. He put on a dark jacket and a baseball cap, the brim pulled down over his eyes. If anyone saw him, they'd think he was just a drifter or a bird hunter. Leroy showed up at the park around 8 p.m. with two friends. They turned on some loud rap that echoed throughout the park and started goofing around, throwing frisbees at each other, laughing and drinking soda. Billy watched through the lens, his heart pounding. He knew Dean patrolled the area on Fridays. It was a habit he'd learned from old social media posts from locals. The sheriff liked to show off, especially to the younger crowd. Half an hour later, a familiar sheriff's car appeared on the horizon. Billy turned on the recorder, pointing the camera at Leroy and his friends. Dean got out of the car, tall, square-jawed, with a badge that gleamed even in the dim light of the streetlights. His gait was confident, almost brazen, like a man who knows he's feared. He walked up to Leroy, who was throwing a frisbee. "Hey, you!" Dean's voice was loud, with a hint of irritation. "Turn off the damn music. This isn't a club." Leroy turned around, holding the frisbee. His friends fell silent, but he just grinned. "What, Sheriff? Is the music in the way? We're just chilling." Billy held his breath, watching every movement. The camera captured everything: Dean's expression, his clenched fists, the way Leroy casually chewed his gum without looking away. I said, "Turn it off." Dean took a step closer, his voice harsher. "Or I will." Leroy shrugged but didn't move. "This is a free country, Sheriff. We're not breaking any rules." Billy saw Dean's face tighten. He knew that look, the look of a man who wasn't used to being crossed. The sheriff stepped toward Leroy, grabbing him by the shoulder. "State your name, boy." "Leroy Jones," he replied, still smiling, but there was a steel in his voice. "What's the problem?" "The problem is, I don't like you," Dean said quietly but menacingly. "Papers, now." Leroy slowly pulled out his wallet, but instead of handing it over, he simply showed the ID, holding it at a distance. "Here, it's all clear. Maybe you could let me go, okay?" Dean snatched the wallet from his hands, and Billy felt his pulse quicken. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Dean began searching for Leroy, shoving him roughly against the bench. "Put your hands behind your back," he snapped. "For what?" Leroy raised his voice, and his friends started filming on their phones. "I didn't do anything." Disobeying an officer, Dean pulled out the handcuffs, his face red with anger. "You think you can be smart about this?" Billy filmed everything, never taking his eyes off the camera. Dean handcuffed Leroy, who wasn't resisting, and shoved him into the car. Leroy's friends screamed, filming as the sheriff led their friend away. Billy knew this was perfect footage. Dean hadn't just abused his authority, he'd let his emotions get the better of him, and it was on film. 2 hours later, Billy was sitting in a motel, uploading the video to an anonymous account Joel had created. He edited the footage, removing any hints of his involvement, and sent it to the local police department, with copies to the Hayesville Post and several Kansas news sites. In an accompanying letter, he wrote, "Sheriff Hatcher is overstepping his authority. This is unacceptable." He didn't sign his name, but he knew it would be enough. By morning, the video had spread across social networks. Posts with the hashtag #HasefulScandal were getting thousands of views. Locals were discussing Dean, his reputation, his behavior. Some recalled old rumors about his cruelty, others demanded an investigation. Leroy, released a few hours later without charges, gave an interview to a local blogger, telling how Dean had threatened him without reason. The scandal was gaining momentum. Billy watched the news on his laptop in the cafe outside the motel. His heart was beating steadily, but inside he felt a sense of satisfaction. Dean was under attack. His reputation was in tatters. But Billy knew this was just the beginning. Plan Zero had worked. Now he was preparing for the next step, and it would be even tougher. Billy Ray sat in a cramped room at the Prairie Star Motel on the outskirts of Wichita, staring at the screen of an old laptop he hadn't opened since he'd tried to set up a GPS for a long-haul trip. The light from the monitor reflected in his eyes, which were as blue-gray as the sky before a storm, but there was no fatigue or pain in them now, only a cold, almost mechanical focus. He hadn't slept properly in weeks, but adrenaline and the bitter coffee from the all-night coffee shop kept him going. Plan Zero had worked better than he'd expected. The video of Dean Hatcher roughly detaining Leroy Jones had gone viral, and Hayesville was abuzz with gossip. The sheriff was under attack, his reputation creaking like an old fence in the wind. But Billy wasn't going to stop. Dean was just one part of the equation. Kara was the center of his pain, his rage, his plan. She had betrayed him, and now he was going to show her that betrayal had a price. The Dean scandal gave Billy time and space to maneuver. While Hayesville discussed the sheriff, Kara remained in the shadows, but Billy knew she was more than just a victim of circumstance. The correspondence with Dean, the credit card in his name, the insurance all pointed to her not being just a mistress, but an accomplice to something much more sinister. System. Dark. He wanted Kara to feel the pressure, to make her world crumble the way he was. And he knew how to do it. The plan he called Money and a Frame was risky, almost insane, but Billy no longer cared about the consequences. He wanted them to pay, both of them. And if Dean was vulnerable because of his reputation, Kara was vulnerable because of her gullibility. She had never understood finances, always left that to Billy. Now it would be her weakness. Billy contacted Joel, his it guy, who had already become his right-hand man in the game. Joel was sitting in his cluttered Oklahoma apartment, surrounded by computer screens and empty energy drink cans. His long hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and his eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, but he wasn't complaining. Billy was paying him well, and working on these cases seemed to bring Joel a strange sense of satisfaction. "You want to pull a scam?" Joel whistled as Billy explained his plan over the phone. "Set your wife up for a financial scam. This is spy movie level, bro. Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Billy's voice was cold as steel. "She got a credit card in my name. Insurance. Planned for an accident. I'm just paying it back." Joel cleared his throat, clearly not expecting such decisiveness. Okay. I can arrange it. Fake company, fake papers, all clear. But Billy, if this gets out, you're in deep shit. The IRS doesn't take kindly to jokes." "I know." Billy looked at his notebook, where details were written down, amounts, dates, names. "Just do it, and quickly." Joel sighed. "Okay, let's do it this way. I'll set up a fake company, apply for a loan through a shell bank in Kara's name. The paperwork will look real, a couple of signatures, a little Photoshop magic. Plus, I'll plant some dirt on her old laptop. Correspondence, bank transfers, anything that points to a scam. Do you want the IRS to find out?" "And to the bank," Billy added. "Let them start digging. Let her panic." "Tough," Joel chuckled, "but I'm in. Give me a couple days." Billy hung up and leaned back on the creaky motel bed. His heart was pounding, but not with fear, with anticipation. He imagined Kara's face when the bank called. Her confusion, her fear. She had always been weak with numbers, always trusted him with paperwork. Now that trust would be her trap. 3 days later, Joel called back. Billy was sitting in a diner across the street from the motel, sipping beer and flipping through the local news. The Dean scandal was still raging. He'd been suspended from patrol pending the investigation, and there was talk in Hayesville of his possible resignation. Billy felt a grim satisfaction, but it wasn't enough. Dean was only part of the problem. Kara was the one who'd ruined his life. "It's all set." Joel's voice was cheerful despite his fatigue. "The company is called Prairie Star Solutions. Sounds like a typical fly-by-night operation, right? I took out a loan for 150 grand in Kara's name. The paperwork is clean, even I'm impressed. Fake invoices, transfers to an offshore account. It all looks like she's laundering money. There's a ton of evidence on her laptop now. Emails, contracts, even a couple of fake chats with partners. I uploaded it to the cloud and made sure the IRS got an anonymous tip. The bank knows, too. How long before they respond? Billy asked, clutching a bottle of beer. The tax office, a couple of weeks, maybe less. The bank is faster. They'll start calling tomorrow. She'll be in shock. Okay? Billy took a sip, feeling the cold bitterness of the beer mixed with his own. And Dean? Dean's got a lot of problems, Joel chuckled. He's been on edge since that video. Rumor has it he hired a lawyer, and he's stopped texting Kara, by the way. I checked their texts, and she keeps texting, but he's not talking. He's probably leaking it. Billy nodded, though Joel couldn't see it. Fine, let it fall apart. He hung up and opened the home camera app. Kara was sitting in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. Her face was pale, and there were shadows under her eyes. She looked lost, and for a second Billy felt a twinge of guilt. But then he remembered what she had said about the accident and his and Dean's plan. The guilt evaporated. He closed the app and went back to his notebook, adding a new entry: loan processed, IRS and bank notified. The next day, Kara got her first call. Billy was watching her through the motel cameras, his laptop on his lap. She paced the kitchen, holding the phone to her ear, her voice shaking. What loan? I didn't apply for anything. This is a mistake. She paused, listening to the other man, her face turning white. 150,000? That's impossible. Billy watched as she sank into a chair, pressing a hand to her forehead. Her fingers shook, and she began to dial someone's number, probably Dean's. But judging by her reaction, he didn't answer. Billy knew this from Joel. Dean was avoiding her, preoccupied with his own problems. The Leroy Jones scandal had undermined his position, and now the sheriff was too busy saving his own skin to help Kara. Billy felt a dark satisfaction. His plan was working. Kara was panicking, Dean was pulling away, and their alliance was falling apart. But he wasn't going to stop. He wanted them both to feel what it was like to lose everything. He opened his laptop and began copying the incriminating files onto a flash drive. It was his backup plan. If the IRS or the bank delayed, he would plant the evidence himself. That evening, Billy received a text from Joel. The bank sent Kara a letter demanding an explanation. The IRS has started an investigation. She called the bank, screaming that it was a scam. It's still holding up, but it's cracking. Billy read it in the cafe, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a small smile. He imagined Kara, her confusion, her fear. She had always hated dealing with paperwork, always trusted him. Now that trust was turned against her. He called Joel. What next? We're waiting, he replied. The bank will put pressure on us. The tax office will dig deeper. She'll start looking for a lawyer, but it'll be hard without money. And Dean, he's already up to his ears in his own shit. I don't think he'll help her. Okay, Billy looked out the window at the sunset. Keep an eye on her. If she tries anything, I want to know. Got it, Joel paused. Billy, are you sure you want to go all the way? This is serious. They wanted to kill me, Joe. Billy's voice was hard as stone. I won't stop. He hung up and finished his beer. His plan was working, but he knew it was just the beginning. Kara and Dean were going to pay the full price. He pulled out his notebook and began planning his next move as the sun set over the horizon, turning the sky blood red. Billy Ray sat in his motel room, smelling of damp and cheap detergent, staring at his laptop. Outside, Wichita was drowning in the evening haze, the neon lights of the signs reflecting off the wet pavement like shards of a broken mirror. His fingers, calloused from driving the black dog, tapped the edge of the table where his legal pad lay, dog-eared and dog-eared, covered in dates and names and details he'd collected like a hunter tracking an animal. The money and the blind had worked. Kara was panicking over a phony loan, the IRS was breathing down her neck, and the bank was sending threatening letters. Dean Hatcher, the once untouchable sheriff of Hayesville, was now drowning in his own scandal after the video of Leroy Jones's false arrest. But Billy knew it wasn't enough. He didn't just want to humiliate them, he wanted to destroy them. And to do that, he had to dig deeper, to where the truth was buried under layers of lies. His mind was cold as the Kansas night, but there was still a fire burning inside him, not rage, but something heavier, duller, like embers smoldering beneath the ashes. Cara and Dean had planned his death, had discussed a traffic accident to collect the insurance money and escape their debts. Billy had seen their conversations on the surveillance tapes, heard their words, and every one of them had seared itself into his memory like a knife. He couldn't forgive. He couldn't forget. But he could make their world crumble, just like his hand. And now, with Dean under attack, Billy was looking for something new to pull, something that would break the sheriff once and for all. The spark came from Joel, a fellow-it guy who delved into the dark corners of the internet with a dexterity Billy could only envy. Joel called late one night when Billy was on his third cup of coffee, trying to fight off the fatigue that had settled over him after weeks without proper sleep. "Got you something interesting," Joel said, his voice tight, but with the excitement of a hunter on a scent. "About Dean. Remember how I said he had a clean record? Well, almost clean. Got a lead, an old one, like 3 years ago. A homeless guy found dead on the outskirts of Hayesville. Officially, self-defense. Dean said the guy came at him with a knife and he shot. The case was closed faster than you can say sheriff. But I dug through old truck forums and local chat rooms. Word got around that it wasn't that clean." Billy sat up straight, feeling the blood rush through his veins. "Rumors? What?" "Like, the homeless guy wasn't dangerous. Drunk, maybe, but not aggressive. Someone wrote that they saw Dean start the conflict himself. And there's a name, an old guy nicknamed Sam the Madman, a veteran, lives in a trailer outside of town. He was supposedly there and saw everything. But no one listened to him because, well, he's not right in the head." "Where can I find him?" Billy asked, already opening his notebook and grabbing a pen. "Trailer park on the old River Road, about 5 miles outside of Hayesville. But watch out, Billy. That Sam guy isn't the friendliest of guys, and if Dean finds out you're digging, he's not going to sit back and do nothing." "Let him try," Billy clenched his fists. "Find me everything there is in this case, and on Sam. I'm going there tomorrow." Joel chuckled. "You're starting to sound like some kind of fucking detective. Okay, I'll handle it. But stay in touch, Ray. This isn't a game." Billy hung up the phone and looked at his reflection in the dark window. His face, weathered and lined and covered in a week's worth of stubble, seemed alien. He was no longer just a truck driver dreaming of steak and his wife's embrace. He was a man with a mission, and that mission was taking him to dark places he'd never thought of before. The next morning, Billy drove Black Dog toward the trailer park. The road to the river was narrow, overgrown with weeds, with potholes that made the truck bounce. The sun was high, but the sky was gray and cloudy, promising rain. Billy parked the truck on the side of the road, a half-mile from the park to avoid attention, and walked, his backpack slung over his shoulder. The backpack contained his camera, his recorder, a couple $100 in cash, and a bottle of whiskey in case he needed to coax Sam into talking. The trailer park looked like it had been forgotten by time for 20 years. Rusty trailers stood in disarray, surrounded by old tires, empty bottles, and broken furniture. The air smelled damp and sour, as if someone had forgotten to take out the trash. Billy noticed a few locals, an old woman hanging out her laundry, a man fixing a motorcycle. No one paid him any attention, and that was fine with him. Mad Sam's trailer sat at the edge of the park, right by the river. It was old, with peeling green paint and a slanted antenna on the roof. Faded curtains covered the windows, and empty beer cans littered the front door. Billy knocked on the door, trying not to look threatening. Silence. He knocked again, louder. "Who the hell is it?" The voice from inside was hoarse, as if its owner had been smoking all his life. "If you're from the tax office, I don't owe anything." "I'm not from the IRS," Billy said, trying to sound calm. "My name is Billy Ray. I want to talk about an old case, about Sheriff Hatcher." The door opened slightly, and an old man in his 70s stared at Billy, thin, with a long gray beard and eyes that darted like a cornered animal. His clothes, old army fatigues, and a tattered t-shirt looked like he hadn't changed them in a week. In his hand, he held a rusty wrench, clearly not for repair. Hatcher, Sam narrowed his eyes. What do you want from him? Did he send you here? No, Billy held up his hands, showing he was harmless. I'm on my own. I want to know the truth. About that homeless guy he shot 3 years ago. They say you were there. Sam froze, his eyes narrowing. Who told you? Rumors, Billy shrugged, trying to look relaxed. I'll pay for the information and provide protection if needed. Sam chuckled, but put the key down. Come in, just no tricks. The trailer was cramped and stuffy inside. Old newspapers, beer cans, and boxes of war medals were strewn everywhere. A bottle of cheap vodka sat on the table, half empty. Sam sat on the sagging couch, motioning for Billy to take a chair. What do you know about that homeless guy? Billy asked, taking out his recorder but not turning it on. And why didn't anyone believe you? Sam snorted, reaching for the bottle. Because I'm Mad Sam, a vet who's seen too much of Iraq and drinks too much. Who needs me? But I saw what happened. That guy, Jack, he wasn't a threat. Drunk, yes, but no knife. Hatcher went for him, screamed at him to get out of town, and then bam, gunshot. That was it. Billy felt his blood run cold. Are you sure? As sure as I am sitting here, Sam said, taking a sip of vodka. I was 100 yards away by the river, saw it all. I tried to tell the cops, but they said I was crazy. Hatcher's their hero, you know. I'm some old nut. Why didn't you leave? Tell someone else. Billy looked at him, trying to figure out how sincere the old man was. Who? Sam smiled bitterly. The local paper. They would have printed that I was drunk again. And Hatcher. He knows where I live. After that, he came here. Said if I opened my mouth, I'd regret it. I'm no hero, man. I just want to live to see another day. Billy nodded, taking an envelope of money out of his backpack. There's 500 and whiskey. Tell it all on camera. I'll make sure you're not touched. Sam looked at the envelope, then at the bottle of whiskey. His hands were shaking, but not from fear, from something else, maybe from hope. Why do you need this? What did Hatcher do to you? It's personal, Billy said, turning on the camera. Just talk. Sam told them everything. His voice was hoarse, but the words flowed smoothly, as if he had been waiting for this moment for years. He described a night 3 years ago, dark, moonless, with a cold wind blowing off the river. Jack, homeless, drunk, sitting by the fire, muttering to himself. Dean pulled up in his car, got out, started screaming. Sam saw him push Jack, saw him fall, trying to get up. There was no knife, just a gunshot, sharp as a slap, and Jack's body motionless on the ground. Sam looked into the camera as he spoke, his eyes full of pain and anger. Billy wrote it all down without interruption. When Sam finished, he turned off the camera and handed him an envelope. Get out of town for a couple of weeks. I'll make sure this gets to the right people. Sam nodded, clutching the money. If Hatcher finds out it was me, he won't know, Billy promised. I'm anonymous. That night, Billy returned to the motel and uploaded the video to an anonymous account Joel had created. He edited the footage, removing any hints of his involvement, and sent it to Kansas police forums, local news sites, and even the district attorney's office. In an accompanying letter, he wrote, Sheriff Hatcher killed an unarmed man. This is not self-defense. Investigate. He didn't sign it, but he knew it would do the trick. By morning, the video was spreading. Forums were buzzing, local bloggers were picking up the story, and Dean was back in the spotlight in Hayesville. Now he wasn't just being accused of abuse of power, he was being called a killer. Billy watched the news from the coffee shop and felt his plan gathering momentum. Dean was on edge. Cara was panicking. Their world was crumbling, and Billy was the one pulling the strings. He knew it wasn't the end, but it was a step closer to the truth and to justice. Billy Ray pulled Black Dog to the curb on Poplar Street, 100 yards from the house that had once been his refuge. Hayesville was engulfed in a gray morning fog, and the familiar blue house with its peeling paint looked almost ghostly, like a faded photograph from the past. Billy sat in the cab, looking out the dimly lit windows, and felt two worlds colliding inside him. The one where he came home to Kara with vanilla shampoo and warm embraces, and this one where he had become a hunter, methodically picking apart their lives. His face, weathered and lined by sun and sleepless nights, was calm, but his eyes gray-blue, like cold steel, betrayed the storm that raged within. This was not Billy, who had left 3 weeks ago, shaken by betrayal. He became someone else, a man who knew what he was doing and had no intention of stopping. The Dean Hatcher scandal had reached a fever pitch. A video confession by Mad Sam, the veteran who had seen Dean shoot an unarmed homeless man, had exploded on local message boards and news sites. Hayesville, a quiet town where gossip usually centered on corn prices and neighborly squabbles, was now buzzing like a disturbed beehive. The district attorney's office had announced a new investigation, and residents were calling for Dean's resignation. His badge, once a symbol of authority, had become a target for anger. The local newspaper, the Hayesville Post, had published a story last night. Sheriff Hatcher resigns due to health. Billy had read it in a Wichita coffee shop and felt a grim smile twitch at the corners of his lips. Health? More likely fear of what might come up next. Dean was cornered, and Billy knew he was the one to blame. Carl was on edge, too. The IRS had issued her a subpoena for a phony loan Billy, with Joel's help, had framed her for through a fake company called Prairie Star Solutions. The bank was demanding an explanation, threatening to garnish her accounts, and her calls to Dean, Joel said, were going unanswered. Their alliance, built on lies and greed, was falling apart. Billy saw it on the security footage. Cara, pale and tear-stained, pacing the house, clutching her phone as if it could save her. She texted Dean, begging him to meet her, but he said nothing. Billy knew why. Dean was saving himself by leaving Cara to her fate. Now it was time to finish what he had started. Billy decided to go back to Hayesville, not to make peace, not to forgive, but to collect the last of his things and look them in the eye. He wanted to see their fear, their despair. He wanted them to know that he hadn't broken, that he hadn't disappeared, that he was still here. Billy stepped out of the black dog, slung his old bag over his shoulder, and walked slowly toward the house. His boots crunched on the gravel, his heart beating like a metronome. He had rehearsed this moment in his head 100 times. What he would say, how he would look, how he would make them feel the chill he had felt since the night he had found Cara with Dean. He had put on a clean shirt, shaved for the first time in weeks, combed his sun-bleached blonde hair. He looked like a man in control, and that was part of the plan. They couldn't see his pain, only his strength. The door to the house was stuck, as always. Billy pushed it with his shoulder, and it creaked open. The hallway smelled of coffee and something sweet maybe Cara was baking, trying to distract herself. He heard footsteps upstairs, then Cara's voice, shaky but familiar. "Who's there?" "It's me," Billy replied, his voice calm, almost soft. "Back for my things." She came down the stairs, and for the first time in weeks, Billy saw her outside of a camera. Cara looked haggard, her brown hair pulled back into a messy bun, her eyes dark and dark, her lips trembling as if she were about to cry. She was wearing the old sweater he'd given her for Christmas 3 years ago, and it stung, but he pushed it down. He had no right to be weak. "Billy," she breathed, pausing on the last step. You didn't call. I thought." "Lots of flights," he shrugged, putting his bag down. His tone was even, but there was a coldness to it, as if he were talking to a stranger. "I thought I'd stop by. I'll grab my things and leave." Cara stepped closer, her hands fiddling nervously with the hem of her sweater. "Please, Billy, let's talk. I know I messed up, but I didn't mean to. This is all out of control." He looked at her, and his eyes, cold and unmoving, silenced her. "Don't, Cara. That's not why I'm here." She opened her mouth to speak, but at that moment the front door creaked again and Dean Hatcher walked in. Billy felt the blood rush to his temples, but his face remained calm. Dean looked worse than he had in the footage. His square jaw was covered with stubble, his eyes were bloodshot, and his usually immaculate shirt was wrinkled. The sheriff's badge was gone from his chest. He was just a man who had lost everything that made him untouchable. Billy, Dean paused in the doorway, his voice hoarse as if he hadn't slept in days. I didn't know you were here. Apparently, Billy smiled, but his smile was sharp as a blade. I thought I'd drop by, pick up a few things. Didn't expect to see you, Dean. Heard you're retired now. Healthy, huh? Dean tensed, his hands clenching into fists. It's none of your business, Ray. Maybe not mine. Billy stepped closer, his voice quiet but menacing. But you know what it is? My home, my wife, my life. And you two decided you could take it all away. Kara gasped, pressing her hand to her chest. Billy, please, it's not like that. Stop lying, he turned to her, his gaze like a blow. I know about insurance, about your plans, about the accident on the road. Do you think I'm blind or stupid? Dean stepped forward, his face flushed. You don't know what you're talking about. This is all a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Billy laughed, but there was no humor in his laughter, only coldness. Like that homeless guy you shot, or Leroy Jones, who you grabbed for no reason. Your misunderstandings are costly, Dean. Kara paled, her eyes widening. What are you talking about, Billy? What homeless guy? Ask your friend. Billy nodded at Dean, not taking his eyes off him. He likes to solve problems with guns. Or didn't you know? Dean took a step toward him, but Billy didn't back down. He was taller than Dean, broader in the shoulders, and though years on the road had made his joints creaky, he could still fight back. You want to hit me, Dean? He asked, his voice almost mocking. Go ahead. Make another mistake. Kara stepped between them, her voice shaking. Stop it. Billy, please go away. We'll figure this out. I'll fix it. Fix it. Billy looked at her, and his smile grew even colder. How? Cancel the loan they hung on you? Explain to the IRS why you laundered money through a shell company, or ask Dean to cover for you while he drowns? Kara froze, her face white as chalk. What loan? What company? Billy, I didn't do anything. Then why is your laptop full of evidence? He spoke calmly, but every word hit like a hammer. Correspondence, transfers, contracts. Do you think the bank just sent you a subpoena? Dean looked at Kara, a mixture of anger and fear flashing in his eyes. What is he talking about, Kara? I don't know, she almost screamed, her voice breaking. It's a mistake. I didn't register anything. Billy looked at them, and something inside him snapped. They didn't know. They really didn't know he'd made it this far. He turned and walked upstairs to the bedroom where his things were kept. Kara called after him, but he didn't stop. He gathered up a few shirts, some old shoes, a few books, anything that still connected him to the house. When he came back down, Kara and Dean were standing in the living room, staring at him like he was a ghost. You can't just leave, Kara said, her voice shaking. Billy, please, let's talk. We talked. He looked at her, his eyes empty. Now I'm leaving. Good luck with the trial, Kara, and to you, Dean, with your problems. He walked out without looking back. The door slammed behind him, and he heard Kara sob, but it didn't affect him anymore. He got into the black dog, started the engine, and pulled out onto the road. His plan was working. Their lives were falling apart, and he was ready for the next step. Billy returned to the motel in Wichita, where his laptop and the security footage were waiting. He opened the app and watched Kara and Dean arguing in the living room after he left. Kara screamed, blaming Dean for dragging her into this. Dean responded sharply, saying she wanted the money and that she had agreed to the insurance. Their words were like poison, and Billy listened, writing down every detail. He knew it wasn't over, but he was close, so close. Billy Ray drove Black Dog up Interstate 81, heading north toward Nebraska. The road stretched out before him like an endless gray ribbon, framed by golden fields of corn that swayed like the sea in the wind. The sun was setting, painting the sky crimson and orange, and the rays reflected off the truck's side mirrors, blinding his eyes. Billy squinted, adjusted the brim of his baseball cap, and tightened his grip on the steering wheel. His hands, roughened from 20 years behind the wheel, were calloused, and his fingers shook slightly, not from fatigue, but from something still churning inside him. He hadn't slept properly in weeks, but the coffee in his thermos and the adrenaline that propelled him forward kept him going. There was a load in the back of Black Dog, boxes of tractor parts that needed to be delivered to Lincoln by morning. It was a routine trip, like hundreds of others, but for Billy it was special. It was his last trip. Not in the work sense, he wasn't about to quit the road. But it was a trip that would complete everything he'd started. His face, weathered and lined by sun and sleepless nights, seemed carved from stone. His eyes, blue-gray as the overcast Kansas sky, looked at the road, but his mind was elsewhere. He remembered Hayesville, his home, Cara, Dean. The memories were like shards of glass, sharp and cutting, but he did not look away. He had done what he had to. Dean Hatcher, the former sheriff, had been arrested. Billy had heard about it from the news on the radio. Cara, the wife he loved more than life itself, was now under investigation for fraud. Their world, built on lies and betrayal, had crumbled, and Billy had been the one who lit the fuse. He turned on the radio to drown out his thoughts, but instead of the usual Johnny Cash, he picked up the local news station. The announcer's voice, dry and businesslike, was jarring. Former Hayesville County Sheriff Dean Hatcher was arrested this morning on charges of abuse of power and possible involvement in the murder of a homeless man 3 years ago. The investigation is ongoing, but sources say new evidence, including witness testimony, points to serious wrongdoing on Hatcher's part. Meanwhile, a local woman, Cara Ray, is suspected of financial fraud involving a fake company and a large loan. Investigators are looking into her possible connection to other crimes. Billy turned off the radio with a jerk, and the cabin was silent except for the hum of the engine. His lips were pressed into a thin line, but he felt no triumph, only emptiness. He had done it. Dean had lost everything: his badge, his reputation, his freedom. Cara was one step away from trial, her life falling apart like a house of cards. But victory brought no relief. It didn't give him his home back, or Cara singing along to Johnny Cash and cooking him steak. It didn't give him his life back. He glanced in the rearview mirror. The road was empty. No cars, no lights, just darkness closing in behind him like a shadow. Billy took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill his lungs. This was his last drive, not just into Nebraska, but into this war he'd been waging since he'd found Cara with Dean. He was done. Now he just wanted to drive. The road was all he had left. Billy had left Hayesville 2 days ago, after showing up at their house to pick up the last of their things. He could still see the faces of Cara and Dean, confused, scared, as if they had seen a ghost. He had been calm, polite, even smiling, but there was a coldness behind his words that had frozen them. He hadn't yelled or threatened. He had simply looked at them, and his gaze was heavier than any words. Cara had cried, begged them to talk, but he had left without looking back. The door slammed behind him like a period at the end of a sentence. He knew he would never come back. Now, on Highway 81, he felt strangely free, but the freedom was bittersweet. His notebook, the one where he jotted down dates, names, details of his plans, lay on the passenger seat, closed. Billy never opened it again. Everything that needed to be done was done. He'd turned off the cameras in the house. The flash drives with the recordings were stored in a safe at a motel in Wichita, his insurance in case Cara or Dean tried anything. But he knew they wouldn't. They were too busy saving their own skins. The trip to Lincoln was simple: deliver parts, sign papers, get paid. But for Billy, it was more. It was his way of saying goodbye to Hayesville, to Cara, to the life he had lost. He didn't know what would happen next. Maybe he'd stay in Nebraska. Maybe he'd go further to Iowa, to Minnesota, to places where no one knew his name. The road had always been his home, even more than the blue house on Poplar Street. Now it was all he had left. Night had fallen as Billy crossed the Nebraska border. Black Dog's headlights picked out patches of asphalt in the darkness, and the stars overhead sparkled like shards of glass. He pulled into a gas station, one of those that sprouted up in the middle of nowhere, with a neon sign and the smell of gasoline. It was warm inside and smelled of burnt coffee and hot dogs. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 40s, with a tired face and short red hair pulled back into a ponytail. Her name tag said Marge. "Coffee?" she asked as soon as Billy walked in. "Black, no sugar," he replied, throwing a couple of dollars on the counter. Marge poured coffee into a plastic cup and looked at him through narrowed eyes. "Long night, huh? You look like the world has ended." Billy chuckled, but there was no warmth in his smile. "Something like that." She nodded, as if she understood more than he had said. "The road heals, sometimes, if you give it a chance." Billy grabbed his coffee and sat by the window, looking out at the dark parking lot. He thought about Marge's words. The road heals. Maybe it does. But for now, all he felt was emptiness. He pulled out his phone, which he hadn't turned on since morning, and saw a text from Joel. "Dean's in jail. Kara's under house arrest. You were right, they're broken. What now?" Billy didn't answer. He turned off the phone and put it in his pocket. What next? He didn't know. But for the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe. Not easily, not freely, but he could breathe. By morning, Billy had reached Lincoln. He dropped off the load, signed the papers, and received a check, which he stuffed into his pocket without looking. Then he climbed into the cab and just sat there, looking at the city waking up under a gray sky. Lincoln was bigger than Hayesville, noisier, but there was nothing about it that felt like home. And yet, Billy felt like this place was his new start, or at least his chance to start over. He turned on the radio, but this time he didn't bother changing the news. Let them talk. Let Hayesville hum. Let Kara and Dean drown in their problems. He had done his job. Now he was free. The empty road lay before him, and in the rearview mirror there was nothing but the darkness he had left behind. Billy Ray drove Black Dog down Highway 26, which led across the endless Nebraska plains to where the horizon met the sky in a haze of sunset light. The road was narrow and worn, with cracks like veins in the asphalt. The fields on either side swayed in the wind, golden and endless, and the occasional farmhouse flickered in the distance like forgotten set pieces. The truck rumbled, its engine growling like an old friend who knows you better than you know yourself. Billy gripped the wheel, his calloused fingers feeling every vibration, every jolt, but his eyes were not on the road, but somewhere beyond, where all plans, all battles, all pain ended. He was driving for 3 days after Lincoln, where he had dropped off a load of parts and collected payment, which he pocketed without counting. This was not a trip for the money. This was a trip for himself. Billy didn't know where he was going, and for the first time in 20 years of driving, he didn't care. The cab was quiet. He had turned off the radio in Kansas after the news had reminded him once again of Dean Hatcher, arrested for abuse of power and suspected of murder, and of Kara, his wife, whose life was now caught in the clutches of a fraud investigation. Their names echoed on the airwaves, echoes of a past he had left behind. Billy felt no triumph, no joy, only emptiness, cold and deep as the canyon he was heading for. He had chosen the place by chance, having seen a sign on the highway, Scotts Bluff Canyon. The name meant nothing to him, but something about it resonated with him, perhaps the promise of solitude, perhaps just the weariness of endless roads. He turned off the main highway, and Black Dog jolted along a dirt path that led to the edge of a cliff. The canyon was not like the movies, not grandiose like the Grand Canyon, but modest, carved by wind and time into the Nebraska plains. But to Billy, it was perfect. There were no people, no noise, just the wind whistling through the tall grass and the vastness that took his breath away. He parked the truck in a deserted lot where he was the only person in sight. The sun was setting, painting the sky crimson and gold and purple, as if an artist had spilled paint on a canvas. Billy turned off the engine, and the silence fell over him like a blanket. Only the wind, the rustling of the grass, and the occasional cry of a hawk in the distance. He climbed out of the cab, his joints creaking from the long hours behind the wheel. His boots left marks in the dusty ground, and the air, cool and clean, smelled of a freedom he had never sought, but which was now his only companion. Billy got the thermos from the cab, poured coffee into a metal mug, and climbed onto the hood of Black Dog. The metal was warm under his palms, warmed by the sun, but already beginning to cool in the cool of the evening. He took a sip of coffee, bitter as his thoughts, but warm as the memory of a home that no longer existed. He sat looking out over the canyon, its jagged edges cut into the earth like scars. The place was as scarred as he was, but it stood firm in the wind, and Billy felt a strange kinship with the desert. His thoughts went back to Hayesville, to the blue house on Poplar Street where he'd spent 18 years with Kara, to her brown hair, braided when she cooked him steak, to her laugh, which had once been music to his ears, but now sounded like betrayal. He remembered Dean Hatcher, his smug smile, his badge as shiny as a lie. Billy had ruined them both. Dean had lost everything: his career, his reputation, his freedom. Kara was under house arrest, her life a nightmare of subpoenas and interrogations. He'd done it, step by step, plan by plan, with cameras, fake companies, anonymous videos. He'd won, but the victory was hollow. Billy took another sip of coffee, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. He wasn't happy. He wasn't jubilant. But for the first time in months, he felt at peace. Not the peace that comes with relief or happiness, but a deep, tangible peace, like the silence that surrounded him. He owed no one anything. No one was looking for him. The Dawes office, the IRS, the bank, they were all busy with Kara and Dean. Billy had disappeared into the road, a shadow, a man without a past. Just himself, Black Dog, and the endless horizon. He pulled his phone out of his pocket, which he hadn't turned on since morning. The screen lit up, showing missed messages from Joel, his it guy, who had become his only ally in this war. "Where are you, Ray? The news is abuzz. Hatcher is being held without bail. Kara is under investigation. They say she broke down during interrogation. What's next?" Billy read the message, but didn't answer. He turned off the phone and shoved it back into his pocket. Joel was a good guy, but even he wouldn't have realized that Billy was done. His war was over. There was no next. He looked at the sunset, which was almost blood red now, and remembered how once, many years ago, he and Kara had driven to the lake to watch a sunset like this. She had sat next to him on the hood of the old pickup, her head on his shoulder, her hair smelling like vanilla. He had thought then that their love would last forever, that they would survive everything: the debts, the arguments, the long drives. He had been wrong. Love had not survived her greed, her weakness, her betrayal. And yet, sitting here on the edge of the canyon, he felt no hatred, only weariness and this strange, heavy peace. Billy hopped off the hood and walked around the edge of the lot, looking down into the canyon. It was deceptively deep, not that deep, but deep enough to make his heart clench. He thought about how easy it would be to step out there into the darkness, not out of desperation, just to disappear. But he pushed the thought away. He wasn't one to give up. He was a trucker, a man of the road, and the road had always been his salvation. He walked back to the truck, pulled an old notebook out of the cab. Its pages were filled with scribbles, dates, names, details of plans he'd methodically carried out. The video of Leroy, the confession of Mad Sam, the fake company for Kara. It was all there, like a map of his war. He flipped through the notebook, stopping at the last page, where he'd written only one word: silence. This was his goal, his ending. Not revenge, not victory, but silence. And now he had it. Billy tore the notebook into pieces, slowly, methodically, and threw the pieces into the canyon. The wind caught them, carried them into the darkness, and he watched them disappear like his past. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe a new flight, maybe a new city, maybe he'd find a place where he could start over. But for now, in this moment, the silence was enough. He sat back on the hood, finished his coffee, and looked up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the sky. They were bright as shards of glass and just as distant. Billy took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill his lungs. No one was looking for him. He owed nothing to anyone, just himself. And that was enough. The sunset faded and night fell over the canyon. Billy climbed into the cockpit of the black dog, but did not start the engine. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and for the first time in months, allowed himself to simply be. The silence was his reward, his sanctuary, and in that silence, he finally found peace. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.